Excellent. I've just had the good to go sign and thumbs up, so I'll start us off. So, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this afternoon's mini summit on road and rail. So, over the next hour, we're going to explore how across the north we can use infrastructure investment to create greener journeys by road and rail. So, by way of quick introduction, I'm Simeon Butterworth. I'm a director at WSP in our transport business. My main responsibilities are around the local government sector and the subnational transport bodies. So this is a subject which is pretty close to my heart, and I'm also currently mobilising our emerging transport net zero advisory business to help our clients with decarbonising their transport networks. So as part of my day job, currently working with Transport for the North with the analysis of their Northern Investment Programme and their Northern Powerhouse Rail Scheme, and supporting a number of clients such as TfGM around how they can decarbonise their networks and help Greater Manchester reach their net zero targets by 2038. So enough about me. We've assembled a really great panel today to talk about the challenge and also the opportunities facing practitioners across our industry, really associated with shaping and influencing transport infrastructure that supports a lot of agendas. In the short term, the economic recovery post-COVID, and long-term transformational growth, and doing all of this whilst ensuring it's delivered in a way in which supports the climate change agenda, given that the transport network is responsible for over 30% of the UK's total annual emissions. So I think it's fair to say that this is all happening under a backdrop of significant uncertainty and change, notably around what might happen post-COVID from a travel behaviours perspective once things eventually settle down and hopefully get back to somewhere near normal, but also from a policy perspective where we've got multiple government funding routes at the moment, levelling up, bus back better, and the recently announced Williams review, the pending integrated rail plan for the north, and as I touched on earlier, the decarbonisation plan, which is due in June, I believe, from the DfT. So a lot going on. But in terms of this session then, before I just hand over to the first speaker, in terms of housekeeping, we've got a reminder that the session is being recorded, 7 speakers who are each going to speak for roughly 5 minutes, and then a Q&A session at the end, which will take us to the top of the hour. So please feel free to post your comments and questions in the chat throughout, and we'll get through to those at the back end of this. So without further ado, if Molly, you could play the pre-record from our first panel speaker, which is Hugh Merriman MP, who's the chair of the Transport Select Committee. And the question that Hugh's going to touch on is, what infrastructure investment in road and rail does the North need to improve connectivity in a post-COVID Brexit world? Brilliant.
It's a great pleasure to speak to the Northern Transport Summit. I will look at some of the big challenges that I believe you have within your geographical area, and then try and bring some relevance to where the Transport Select Committee is currently holding inquiries. And obviously the challenge for the North is you're home to 1.1 million businesses, 7.7 million jobs, 15 million people, and a population growth of 6.7%. So more transport spend is needed. We also know that there is a real productivity lag at the moment with regards to the North compared to the rest of the country. And I think there's a strong case to say that's because the transport infrastructure is just not what you deserve. So I applaud the way that you've brought yourselves together to ensure that you can get more out of the government. It certainly seems the political wind is in your favour. There's been great play made by the government of the fact that the southeast of England only has one major transport project over the next period. That's obviously not gone down too well in the southeast, but it means that a lot of the shift of direction will see more infrastructure spend up in the north. What's absolutely essential is that the money is actually well spent and well planned for, and I think that's where you have these new projects coming up. You can learn the lessons certainly from us in the south when it comes to Crossrail, which has just not been delivered well. And I hope that the lessons will be learned with regards to the build out of HS2. As a committee, we're absolutely pledged to investigating HS2 and ensuring it delivers value for money and is delivered on the new time. And we will be coming up to your region to hold another one of our 6-monthly reviews, so we can go out on the road and actually hear from business leaders and stakeholders as to how HS2 can really regenerate if it is delivered. Should also just touch on the road building side of things. RIS2 gives a great, exciting opportunity for 50% more money to be spent than on RIS1. Just a sort of note of caution, a lot of the RIS1 period was not properly spent out because there were too many projects laid out and Highways England couldn't deliver them. So I think it's absolutely essential that you work with the government agencies such as Highways England and Network Rail to ensure that the projects they're building out are the ones you want and actually can be delivered. And another part, and again, something I really welcome because I think it just shows you're ahead of the game, is your sort of vision for an integrated plan, so that you've got the Trans-Pennine upgrade integrated with Northern Powerhouse rail projects and HS2, and it's absolutely essential that those are all tied in together if they are going to be delivered. And a big challenge I had for the Prime Minister when he was in the chamber announcing that HS2 would indeed go ahead after that review is how do you actually get all of these things done? And to me, it's not just a question of the money, it's a question of the bandwidth and actually having the resources on the ground to be able to deliver it. So another good example of that is the buses strategy that the government have set out. It's an excellent strategy. It makes a lot of sense to see how authorities can bid for more funds to improve their services and get a greener fleet of bus provider. But a lot of local authorities have been hollowed out and they just don't have the expertise inside their city and town halls to be able to deliver for those bids. So I think it's essential the government doesn't just put money into the infrastructure and the machinery. They also need to put money inside the city, county and town halls to ensure that there's expertise there to deliver it. That doesn't just apply for the bus strategy, it also applies for the levelling up funds and other monies that the government's going to devolve. I think there's a great danger that we won't see that money spent properly because we haven't got the expertise and the officers to spend it. So the message I've made to government is it's not just a question of money, for which there seems to be quite a bit being allocated. It's also a question of investing in people to ensure that money can be properly spent. I'll just make a final note on a couple of other projects and inquiries that we're working on which impact the North. One is smart motorways. Obviously, there's been a great level of concern as to whether they're safe or not. We are looking at those presently. And the other, which I think is really exciting, is the rollout of electric vehicles by 2030. We need the infrastructure to ensure that that is delivered. If the infrastructure doesn't come, the consumers won't be comfortable with it, and as a result, we'll go nowhere further with decarbonising the roads. The other aspect to this is about pricing. So to me, the best way to make people take a check at whether they should be using their car, should be adding to congestion, should be doing better for the environment, is to price driving as a unit as you go. We've seen for something as simple as the plastic bags tax that if you put 5p on it, then people stop using it and change their behaviours. I think the technology is now in place for us to say to drivers, this is how much it will actually cost you to drive. We will give you a better price at various times. That will reduce congestion and ultimately it will fill a big black hole, which we'll have for about £40 billion for the Treasury when vehicle excise duty and fuel duty goes away with the rollout of electric. So a lot of what we're doing from the Select Committee is about how government can do things better and smarter. That's our infrastructure inquiry as an example, but also how we can harness new technology and new change and tie in targets such as our drive to get to net zero and see behavioural shift and change so that we can get people away from car and incentivise them more towards public transport and active travel. I know that there's big ambitions with your leaders. Mayor of Manchester is a good example to try and lead to a sort of much more devolved situation within transport, and I absolutely welcome that. But I think it's absolutely essential that we all work together to learn best practice across the board and ensure that you in the North have the level of transport infrastructure that's been starved of you for so many years. And without that, you will not get the productivity gains you're pushing for. So the last thing I want to do is just applaud everything you're doing. You couldn't be doing anything more. You've had a couple of blows, I think digitisation on rail being one of them, where the government didn't deliver as they should have done. You can rest assured that our Transport Select Committee will continue to scrutinise government policy and demand more in the same way that you are. I hope you enjoy the rest of your conference.
Excellent. Some really interesting insights there from Hugh, and some interesting references to pricing to change behaviours using economic nudge theory to drive change, and also acknowledgement that the North is ahead of the game, which is always good to hear. So moving on to our next speaker, I'll introduce Jules Townsend, who's Chief Executive for the Community Rail Network. Again, this is another pre-record, so Molly, if you could press go, please, that would be super.
Hi, I'm Jules Townsend. I'm Chief Executive of the Community Rail Network. We support community-based partnerships and groups to engage with their railways, including many in the North. I also live in West Yorkshire. I'm a local volunteer, campaigner and village councillor. And I'm going to provide a snapshot of community rail and suggest some key principles that our experience and research suggests are important for achieving positive change within transport. So firstly, a bit about community rail. It's a growing grassroots movement, widespread and well established in the North. Nationally, there are 74 community rail partnerships. These are small organisations working locally with train operators, local authorities and other partners, promoting rail and enabling more people to benefit from the sustainable mobility that it offers, providing communities with a voice as well and helping rail partners to understand local needs. On top of that, there are about 1,000 station friends groups around Britain delivering volunteering and community projects at stations. And it's all about helping communities to derive maximum value from their railways and stations, including by using them, of course. So it includes community arts projects and gardening at stations to create a sense of local ownership and pride, bolstering inclusion and well-being, and sometimes bigger projects that return station buildings to community use and support local regeneration. It includes programmes to engage young people, families and marginalised groups to boost rail confidence and awareness, something that's lacking across much of the population and is of course crucial post-pandemic. Projects to better connect rail with walking, cycling, buses and community transport are increasingly prevalent in community rail, and lots of work goes on to advise the rail industry on improvements that can make a big difference to local people and sometimes helping to build a case for major infrastructure and service improvements. And naturally, there's lots of attention right now to how we can support the recovery of our railways and communities, such as by encouraging use of rail for sustainable tourism. We're Community Rail's umbrella body, so we share good practice, we support our members to deliver positive impact locally, and we advise on strategic insights that emerge from community rail. And about a third of our members are in the North. You'll find a map on our website, communityrail.org.uk, or we're happy to advise on how you can work with community rail. And from its unique position, community rail offers crucial insights, and I want to share 3 key points on this. Firstly, I think we clearly need to use this moment of change to reevaluate and to be clear about our sustainable transport priorities. Building back better, of course, doesn't just mean getting more funding for the North to do the same things in the same way. It means taking the opportunity where needed to do things differently, with sustainability and social equity firmly at the forefront. And that's crucial in transport, where we've had decades of car-orientated thinking and planning, and where the evidence is clear that private car use must be drastically and rapidly reduced if we're to achieve climate targets. We must be clear that public transport, combined with active travel, community transport and shared mobility, is the way forward, and move away from the idea that electric cars will save the day. We must recognise that ongoing investment in car-orientated development can undermine that message and efforts within communities to make public transport and active travel the natural first choice. By instead focusing on truly sustainable and inclusive pathways in transport, we can unleash great benefits for our communities, local economies, and local and global environments. And I'd suggest donut economics is a positive framework for ensuring our economic development priorities are genuinely building back better and greener and not just the same. Secondly, integration and holistic thinking is vital. We must move away from modal silos to enable greater value to be derived both from existing transport assets as well as new investments. With the stepping up of active travel investment, and the new bus strategy, the new rail white paper, we've got a great chance at the moment to better join up rail, bus, walking, cycling, shared and community transport. And we mustn't take that for granted. There's a lot of work to be done in this area. And my final point is about engaging and listening to and empowering communities, making it easier for communities to work with us, to share their views, and putting local people in the driving seat of change as much as we can. We must treat local campaigners and the rich tapestry of civil society across the north as our allies, working with these people, not pulling against them. We know from community rail and wider experience, such as the climate assemblies in Leeds, that when people come together locally, when they discuss and explore the issues together and feel empowered, it helps us to identify workable solutions and creates a sense of ownership over the process of change. And that couldn't be more important when it comes to transport, an area where investment and infrastructure is crucial, yes, but we also need behavioural and cultural shifts, and for those strands to work in synergy to deliver rapid results. To build back better and greener, the communities of the north must not only be heard and involved, but own this change. Thank you.
Excellent, and a really informative discussion there from Jules around community rail and how engagement with the communities can support positive change in transport. Particularly likes the reference to building back greener and not relying on the magic silver bullet that some people predict is going to come with electric vehicle projections. And I think the RTPI's report highlighting that will still result in a 40% gap in terms of reduced emissions, and even with EV uptake projections as they're currently predicted is an interesting read. So moving on to our next speaker and our first live speaker of the day, I introduce David Clarke, who's a technical director at the Railway Industry Association. And the question for David and what he's going to speak to is around in recovery, how can we best reset and build back better road and rail in the north?
Thank you very much, Simeon. Really good and important question. Firstly, I have to say I'm probably not going to answer the road part of the question very well because I don't profess to be a road expert. And the Railway Industry Association, the clue's in the name. We are the voice of the supply chain for the railway industry. But I do live in Yorkshire, and I do use the road and rail network in Yorkshire and the north. And so I understand the congestion challenges and the latent demand that exists, I believe, for public transport in the north. The journey times that we experience, whether it's by road or rail, are not what you would expect in the 21st century, I would argue, and therefore it's really encouraging to see Transport for the North with a really ambitious strategic transport plan, and their assessment, as I'm sure many on the call will know, is that that investment has the potential to drive £100 billion of GVA benefit over its lifetime and 850,000 jobs. I'll just say that again: 850,000 jobs. And that if we're looking for building back better and rebalancing, that's a pretty good place to start. Now that's when that transport network is completed, but it's got to be built in the meantime. And a piece of work that we did, we support and facilitate a team called the Northern Rail Industry Leaders. And it's fairly self-explanatory. It's a group of people from the rail supply chain, in particular, across the north of England. And our assessment is that during the building, that will generate an additional 600 million per annum GVA just for the for the activity that's going on in developing that, and an additional 10,000 jobs. Now, if I build on that, who knew that about 25% of the UK rail supply chain is in the north of England? That's 58,000 jobs, which are sort of under the radar, because, you know, unlike perhaps with an automotive or aerospace industry where there's a big factory and it's fairly obvious, these jobs are spread throughout the north in smaller businesses, in SMEs and larger companies across the north of England. They're probably not household names, but that is a significant part of the northern economy. And these are good jobs, these are high value jobs. Sadly, because of a thing that that sort of affects the rail industry and you know, possibly other sectors, but certainly the rail industry, we have a phenomenon we call boom and bust, which is where we just don't see a continuity of investment that allows those businesses to invest in the people, plant and process, which drives continuous improvement, drives higher productivity. Hugh Merriman mentioned the productivity gap. That's a real challenge, but it's fixable, certainly for our industry, if we have some confidence around the pipeline, so that then we can get in and invest in, as I say, the people, plant and process that drive efficiency. So we're confident that we can deliver. There's a big economic benefit. We calculate, we had a piece of independent work done a couple of years ago, which calculates for every pound that is spent on rail investment, you see £2.20 in the wider economy. You know, that is a pretty good level of leverage. So I mentioned the Northern Rail industry leaders. We have been working to look at how the supply chain can support the investment in the north, both Transport for the North, Network Rail, and also HS2. We look forward to the integrated rail plan. That's really, really important, going back to the point I was making about giving industry some certainty, some visibility of pipeline. It's really, really important that that comes through soon, as is the transport decarbonisation plan, which has already been mentioned. So the manifesto, if you like, for the Northern Rail industry leaders is not dissimilar to what you might see elsewhere in the country, but focused on the benefits for the north. And it's decarbonise, and that's get on now. And we're calling for a rolling programme of electrification and fleet orders of hydrogen and battery trains. Why are we saying that? Well, because if you get on now, you save carbon now, but also you retain the skills that we have developed in the industry over recent years, which are now under threat because there isn't actually any active or significant active projects on the ground. And the last thing we need to do is lose those skills when we know we're going to need them just down the road. It's digitalisation, and it's really good to see in Williams the focus, Williams Shaps as I should call it now, to see the focus on the potential benefit of digitalisation, bringing the industry into the 21st century. And it's innovation. We've got a really strong innovation infrastructure in the north, with universities like Huddersfield, Sheffield, Newcastle and Leeds, all very active in that area. And all those suppliers I mentioned before who are working to support them. And I have to say, to say the least, the pandemic is unfortunate, but for Northern Rail, it's particularly unfortunate because it just landed at the point where they were introduced, both Northern and Transpennine, as well as LNER, introducing new fleets of trains, really potentially transforming the experience for the passenger. And there haven't been enough passengers to actually see that and benefit and create a buzz about just how good rail in the north is becoming and its potential for the future. And my last point is that the most useful thing that rail can do is be so good that it just drives modal shift.
Excellent. Thank you, David. Much appreciated. And the transport planner in me can't can't let an opportunity to comment on a BCR of 2.2 for the sector. I must jump on that. But yeah, I echo looking forward to the integrated rail plan and the support the urgency point around the decarbonisation agenda. It's really important that we act quickly if we're going to meet net zero targets. So thank you very much. Our next speaker, if I can introduce Angela Barnacle, who's the Chief Officer for Asset Management and Regeneration at Leeds City Council. So welcome, Angela. And your question to talk to is, are pre-COVID infrastructure priorities and plans such as Northern Powerhouse Rail, HS2, roads and stations still priorities if the North is going to level up? So over to you.
Thanks, Simeon, and hello, everybody. And first of all, I'm just going to start with a caveat that I am totally ghosting in here as not being a transport or a rail professional, but actually as a chartered surveyor who lives within a city that is hugely going to benefit from rail-led investment. And I think the question was all about, were our pre-COVID plans still relevant now that, you know, there is this notion of how city centres will change, how the future of work will change transport behaviours, etc., etc. So I'm really going to try not to mention GVA, not to mention BCRs, but actually to talk about real people who live in real cities, who have real-time problems that are affected today. And if I cast my mind back to when I started working on HS2, I had no children at that point, and my 5'2" child, year 7, has just started high school. And I certainly know that high-speed rail is beyond my economic lifetime, but I think the goal for us all here is not to put it beyond hers. And if anybody wants to see what a full rail blockade of one of the main stations in the country looks like, please do not come to Leeds on Sunday and Monday this week, because even in our currently stabilising pandemic numbers, that is going to be quite difficult for a major city to cope with. And then if I cast your mind back to, do you remember those bank holidays when we used to have things on? Well, if I take you back to 2019, when we had the Ashes series in Leeds, the Leeds Festival, I think the Rhinos were playing in Wembley, we had the Leeds Carnival, and some what are relatively minor engineering works which were taking place outside of King's Cross meant that the East Coast Main Line did not run for that day. And they are minor engineering works in reality. And if anybody wants to say that upgrading of the East Coast Main Line is a real credible proposition, I would suggest it is nothing but a distraction. And if we have to start talking about rail replacement bus lanes, I think as an industry, we have really failed our people who are living and breathing that disruption day in, day out. So to think about what's going to happen as we return to a level of new normal, some of the data that we're seeing through in Leeds is that car journeys are recovering really strongly. The bus is recovering really strongly. What's recovering less strongly, but it is recovering, is rail. And I would offer that solution that rail is actually a lifestyle choice. And people make a decision about rail travel. And if it's not rail, it's not going to be on the bus and it's not going to be on the bike, it's going to be in the car. So if we really have a commitment towards sustainable communities, and even I was really pleased to hear somebody else say that electric cars are not the total answer, they're an interim solution, but they still do take up a sizable chunk of my driveway, as I have learnt out, and they don't move as often, they move at the same reliability as the diesel car. So electric cars are part of the answer, but rail has to be part of our long-term sustainable solution. And new tracks are the only answer, I would suggest. What happened pre-pandemic in terms of us, you know, we still had 50% of people who would arrive at Leeds Station, which is about 34 million people on average. 50% of those were late. I would suggest they're still going to be late when they start to come back after the 21st of June. So I would suggest now more than ever, are our plans that we had pre-pandemic more than relevant? And it was really helpful to hear what your first speaker talked about in terms of putting investment into places and local authorities to give them the bandwidth to come up with schemes and really push forward their ambitions. And it was really helpful, and perhaps the slip of the tongue, which was unfortunate, when he said that they will be on the road again to talk about their plans for HS2. Well, it couldn't be more ironic, and I perhaps think it was probably a slip of the tongue. And to confirm, to stick to this new timetable, Well, for the 15 million people who sit to the east of the Pennines on HS2 Phase B, where 70% of the benefits are going to be felt, we don't have a timetable yet. What we do have is continuing delay, which is worth £5 billion per annum to that 15 million people. And I know that £5 million per annum is certainly significant to us, and I think it should be significant to anyone. And it was really helpful to hear, I think it was Dave talk about these, what was it, 850,000 jobs. Well, the good news is for delivering Phase 2B East, we only need 37,000 for it to break even. And we think our growth strategies will provide over 150,000 jobs. So even if we want to get into that great debate, which I'm sure we will in any Green Book appraisal about, have we overestimated the jobs? Well, we'd only need 25% of our current estimates for it to break even. So I would probably conclude with, now more than ever, and not necessarily just for the sake of our children, do we need to give momentum? Because what we heard, certainly when Dave was talking about that supply chain, and bearing in mind, just in the MP11 region alone, there are 2,500 SMEs in that rail sector. They need momentum, they need commitment to building towards the next thing. So I'd say now more than ever, are our plans more credible? It is absolutely the right thing to say that we should test them. But fundamentally, delay is costing us uncertainty, and instead of us gaining value, we are losing value rapidly. But other than that, it's very positive.
Excellent. Thanks, Angela. Much appreciated. And I think a common theme is emerging around visibility of the pipeline and providing the industry with certainty so that we can plan for change and make sure that we deliver the right things at pace. So thanks very much for that. And I'll move us on to our next speaker, which is Robert Nisbet from the Rail Delivery Group. And Robert's a director for the Rail Delivery Group. And the exam question that's been set for Robert is, what are the priorities for levelling up the North's rail infrastructure in a post-COVID Brexit world? So over to you, Robert.
Thanks very much indeed, Simeon. And it's fascinating to hear that all of us drawn from different parts of the world, whether it be transport or politics, we're all saying roughly the same thing here. There have been a lot of people talking today, actually. There have been quite a few kind of conferences and think tank events where some big beasts in this world are speaking. And Grant Shapps was talking a little bit earlier on this morning to an event, a think tank in London. And he came up with this quote, which I thought was really interesting. As the economy prospers, so will our public transport. And I think that's curious for a Secretary of State for Transport, because I would spin it the other way around. You know, if our public transport prospers, then our economy will. And that's why, you know, looking at this through the post-pandemic lens is so important, because this is not just about the people that get on our trains, which is what, 10%, 11% of people, certainly of journeys. It's the 100% of people that live in Great Britain that will benefit from a thriving rail industry. So I just want to set a little bit of context to help answer the exam question, looking specifically at the north of England, which was disproportionately affected by the pandemic. So, I mean, just to put some figures on that, while many workers in London and the southeast were able to work remotely, the majority of service industry workers based in the north were forced out of their workplaces and into unemployment, some of them. ONS figures have shown that while as many as 60 to 70% of workers in Richmond upon Thames and other London boroughs were able to work home between January and December of 2020, only around 26% in Liverpool's local authorities were able to do the same, meaning furlough and unemployment for many. And these ONS figures show that for the 3 months ending September 2020, the highest unemployment rate estimate in the UK was in the northeast, 6.7%. So that is the context, you know, that what we were seeing before, trends, and certain the way that we live our lives has been kind of catalyzed by the impact of the pandemic. But the concern that I think many of us in the rail industry have is this obsession and the talk all the time about, you know, working from home and hybrid living or whatever, and that in effect, you know, our competition in the rail industry for long journeys was often the car or even the plane in some cases, but now this is our competition as well. And if we're making big infrastructure decisions based on, well, a lot of my neighbors are saying that they're probably going to be working from home, then that is worrying, because we cannot be swayed from those infrastructure commitments that have been made because of how people think we are going to be behaving and living, after the pandemic. And I really support what Sir John Armett told this summit today, a little bit earlier on today, along those lines, that we mustn't be swayed and that we must commit to those commitments, including, of course, HS2 and the transformative effect that the Eastern leg will have, as Angela has just set out. So, obviously we're in a position of a kind of enormous change, that not only as we come out of the pandemic, we've also got these big tectonic plates shifting within the industry, within the rail industry. So we just had the white paper, which we welcome, but there are a number of issues that the industry wants to ensure that are sorted and could have dealt with. One of them being, how do local authorities, subnational transport bodies, feed into this Great British Railway arm's length body? And it appears that we're going to have to wait for the Levelling Up white paper to find out how that connective tissue is going to happen, because it's absolutely vital. Everybody so far has been talking about integrated transport networks rather than, I think it was Jules who was talking about modal silos. We need to get those people who are closest to the passengers, in many cases the train operating companies, but also the local authorities, and with their strategic plans, and the subnational transport bodies that have done such tremendous work around the country. Those also need to be fed in and considered and consumed by Great British Railways. So that kind of thinking is essential. And also, as everybody else has said, we've had the white paper. We waited a long time for that, 2 years. We need the integrated rail plan for the North, and where it's a matter of weeks, but we need to look at that with the white paper, with the Levelling Up white paper, as well as the William Shack's white paper and the transport decarbonisation plan. So all of these have to be seen together, and then we can hopefully find that shaded bit in the Venn diagram to deliver for Britain, because that's in effect, what this is all about. Just one final thing, because I know that there's been a lot of people and a lot of talk, but other things that we have concern about is we need to make products that get people back onto the railway. We've talked about how the trains are quite pleasant at the moment because there aren't a huge number of people on them. That isn't sustainable. We need more bums on seats. And so therefore we need to have products available to them that suit perhaps changing lifestyles, but don't just focus on commuters, but look at the opportunities in the leisure world as well. And so that's why, therefore, while we welcomed talk of pay-as-you-go around the country in the white paper, we want the government to go much further and much deeper and open up the ticketing and settlement agreement, which was formed back in the 90s, reflected in an entirely different way that we live our lives, so that we can revolutionize and deliver for our passengers, but also allow our ticketing systems to speak to those of other modes as well, because at the moment those modal silos are kind of enforced by the kind of sclerotic ticketing system that sits beneath the transport network. So an awful lot to say in there, but it's really encouraging to hear this kind of enthusiasm, this ambition, and this dynamism. And with the greatest respect to the road contributors on here, we do need to prevent a car-led recovery, and yet all the statistics seem to show that people are using their cars as almost as a form of PPE. And we can't let that happen. We've got to get other people back onto the network. And to pick up that point about environmental taxes that we were talking about earlier, we want to see a review of all the environmental taxes, not just fuel duty, but also air passenger duty, which the government has said that it's committed to look at again in order to see how we can incentivize people back into the greenest form of transport. I'll stop there, Simeon.
Excellent. No, thank you, Robert, and lots in there. And I really interesting about the ONS statistics around working from home, in effect mirroring the productivity gap across the UK, which shouldn't be too much of a surprise, but I think it does highlight the scale of the challenge ahead. I I 100% agree around collaboration and integration is being key to how this is taken forward, and really support. There is a lot going on at the moment. We're waiting for a lot, and so but that should hopefully bring with it a lot of opportunity. And I love the analogy around cars being PPE. That's fantastic, and kind of segues me nicely into introducing Owen Wilson, who's a major road strategy manager at Transport for the North. I'd be very much interested to see what Owen's got to say, and providing the road side of the argument just to balance things out. And the question for Owen is, how can we lead the green recovery in the North, build back better and decarbonise road and rail to reach net zero by 2050 or sooner? So over to you, Owen.
Thanks, Simeon, and good afternoon to everyone. And I suspect I'm going to talk about similar themes to the rest of the speakers, but to come back on Robert's point, first of all, I absolutely agree. Strong public transport use will benefit the economy. It also has really positive social and environmental outcomes. And you know, at TfN, we're coming from it from that perspective. And as the major road strategy manager, I'm not just about building roads, though roads are needed to support our economy. So there's no doubt that there are significant challenges ahead. How do we re-energize our economy after the pandemic? And as has already been said, some of the hardest hit areas are in the north of England, and indeed some of the sectors that will always rely on, you know, people travelling to and from work are based, you know, heavily based in the north. The advanced manufacturing sectors, where, you know, it's critical that people can get safely to work. You know, we've got a heavier representation here than the south, for example. There's also, this is all against the backdrop of the need to rapidly decarbonise transport, and very shortly TfN will be launching its decarbonisation strategy. We've agreed a trajectory for the north of England with our 20 local transport authority partners, our LEPs and highway authorities, and we'll be consulting on that over the summer. And it's really ambitious and really challenging, but we believe it is achievable if we all work together in trying to achieve that, and I'll come into that in more detail in a second. People have already talked about silos. We do need to stop operating in silos, and I think that's where there's real strength in the subnational transport bodies, the mayoral combined authorities, and in devolution, you know, actually happening at the local level. So you can bring together those industrial and economic strategies, spatial planning, the digital connectivity that's needed, which will help support, you know, the home working, for example. Education and skills, and of course how we plan and operate our transport networks. And we've seen real successes in some of the combined authority areas. Tees Valley mayor just recently re-elected with a much heavier majority, you know, promoting investment in the rail network, Darlington, Middlesbrough, and of course Greater Manchester with Andy Burnham, very high profile, and pushing forward plans for, you know, much greater integration of transport in the Greater Manchester area, and taking tough decisions around reallocation of road space, which perhaps you wouldn't have achieved without that high-profile support from a high-profile politician. So what we'd like to see is strong partnerships and collaboration across government, across the subnational transport bodies, and with local communities, allowing local communities and regional bodies to make the decisions where we know best what's best for our local communities. And picking up on what Hugh Merriman said, the bandwidth of local partners, that's something I see every day in my job. Local authorities have been whittled out in terms of resources, in terms of staffing levels, and we need to support them to bring forward the right types of initiative in the future. So what's TfN doing about all of this? Well, we published our investment programme in 2019, 70 billion of investment in the transport network in the north, NPR being a key part of that. Building on that, since 2019, as I've mentioned already, we've agreed a decarbonisation trajectory with progress plans for NPR, but we're still waiting for the integrated rail plan. We need to see that published shortly. And we've also looked at where we do need investment in our major roads and strategic road network, where there are pinch points on the network, where the evidence suggests that you still need to make sure that the network's functioning effectively and efficiently. And to help us with all of this, we've developed a much more holistic approach to understanding the outcomes of transport investment, looking at the social, environmental and economic outcomes of our programme. And that's really what we're focusing on, the outcomes, not the solutions, particularly where you're looking at new road investment. It's about the function of the road, not necessarily building new roads because you think that's the immediate first choice. I think there are some inconvenient truths in all of this that we all need to recognise. The vast majority of trips in the north, in the country as a whole, take place on the road network. 95% of emissions, carbon emissions in the north, come from road transport. 87% of freight is moved by road. And yes, we want to get more freight on rail. We want to see TRU, W12 cleared, and other new capacity on the rail network for freight. But the majority of freight will still be moving by road in the future. What we also know is there are an awful lot of very short trips by road, and that's where our local partners come in terms of encouraging more active travel, higher bus use and more shift to rail. But having said that, there are also a considerable proportion of long distance trips where the emissions actually add up to over 50% in terms of road transport emissions. So it's those long trips where we need to get people on rail and also move towards electric vehicles. And that moves me on to a piece of work we're now starting at TfN. And I think this is filling a vacuum that we've seen at a national level to understand where we need to see the rollout of electric vehicle infrastructure to support people in moving to electric vehicles, where that is the best option. We don't want to see a repeat of the sort of broadband connectivity issue where many areas were left behind in terms of good connectivity. We need to understand where EV charging is needed, work with the suppliers so they also understand where they need to provide the electrical supply, and work with the industry as well to get that installed. So just to conclude, I think that the top three things top three key messages I'd like to end with are: we need to be vision-led. TfN set out a vision for the North in terms of transport. We must be evidence-driven and work with our partners in terms of developing that evidence. And we need a place-based approach and a holistic approach to how we invest in transport and support recovery and levelling up in the future. Thank you.
Excellent. No, thanks for that, Owen, and really interesting to see how Transport for the North is leading the way in setting the policy agendas to really help to drive and support change across the North. I think that's incredibly important, and having looked through the decarbonisation plan, I can recommend it to others to have a flick through. I think it does articulate the complexity of the problem, and probably that it's, without wanting to play to the audience of TfN too much, it probably is the best document I've seen that brings it all together in one place. So point folks in that direction. So last but not least, if I could introduce Chris Page, who's the chair of Rail Future, and Chris is going to speak to us around is greater investment in new infrastructure technologies and innovation the way to build back a smarter, faster, greener and more reliable network. So over to you, Chris.
Thanks, Simeon. Rail Future is a national voluntary organisation which campaigns for a bigger, better railway to enable economic growth, improve the passenger experience and decarbonise transport. Investment must be directed to where it will have the most effect. And making the railways greener isn't necessarily rocket science. For example, railways are green when you maximise loads, be they passengers or freight. A relatively small investment in unblocking key pinch points and providing longer loops with decent entry and exit speeds will make sure the longest 775 metre freight trains can be pathed on the network. For example, some smart investment in Rail Future's proposal for rerouting freight trains to Trafford Park would unlock the Castlefield corridor, see behind me. The big investment, though, has to be in electrification. Rail Future supports the Decarb 21 call for a rolling programme which is needed to meet decarbonisation targets. A rolling programme will give the industry the confidence it needs to build experienced teams and so reduce the cost. Priority must go to intensively used routes with a focus on freight. A 2,000-tonne freight train can save much more carbon than a 2-car passenger train, but it takes up the same rail space. To accelerate decarbonisation, we also need to achieve modal shift of passengers and freight to rail, which is the most sustainable transport option. I think that's been mentioned several times already. People make door-to-door journeys, so the railways have to be smarter, offering integrated travel solutions and reliable services to deliver the improved passenger experience that's needed to encourage people to use rail for part of their journey. Achieving integration is actually more about getting agreement between the different organisations and people involved than the technology. We need rail and bus timetables that align. We need selective marketing and flexible pricing to optimise passenger loadings. We need single leg pricing to remove the anomalies. And we need no zonal fares in urban areas. Only then will the railways regain the trust of passengers, and that's what's necessary for all the investment that we need in digital retailing to pay off. That then enables booking of door-to-door journeys, including perhaps autonomous taxis looking forward and car hire, to provide mobility as a service. Achieving rail reliability requires a laser focus on operation, managed by experienced teams with the right skills. It's about people again. However, there are some opportunities for innovation and investment in digital infrastructure which will help. Artificial intelligence systems perhaps can help the railway cope with disruption, providing relevant and accurate advice to passengers so that your journey isn't disrupted as much as it might be at the moment. Scheduling and real-time traffic management systems can help drivers to drive a smooth profile, rather than repeatedly slowing or stopping and then having to speed up again because they're caught up the train in front. Just-in-time management regimes and inspections using drones can reduce costs. Finally, when we do succeed in building back better, we'll need more rail capacity. Investment in Northern Powerhouse Rail will effectively bring the northern cities closer together, enabling them to operate as a single economic entity and so enjoy the same agglomeration benefits as London. Computer-aided design technology for stations isn't new, but there's now the opportunity to use it to model their position in the city. Superimposing new buildings on photographic images of the city gives context, integrating the station with the streetscape. Then there are massive opportunities for reducing costs and for improving passenger flow to travel connections and into the city. So an imaginative design for a through HS2 Northern Powerhouse Rail station at Manchester Piccadilly would enable through high-speed services from London and Birmingham via Manchester to Leeds. Thanks.
Brilliant. No, thank you, Chris. Much appreciated. And I think we've probably, it was always going to be a challenge with the number of speakers in terms of time and left for questions, but we do have a few minutes before we need to move back to the main plenary for the closing remarks. So if there are any questions, feel free to post those in the chat. From what I can see in there at the moment, the main question really, it's more of a statement around the disparity of investment per head of population in transport infrastructure between the south and north, which I think is something that has been well publicised and continues to be a frustration for us all, and the need to address that. I don't know if anybody would like to just provide their perspective on that for 2 minutes from the panel. Mary's had her hand up. So
right, sorry, okay, go for it.
Sorry, I don't know, Mary, do you want to speak?
Hi, first of all, I'd like to apologise for being late to the meeting, but I'd just like to say all I've heard is Manchester Leeds. Fleetwood hasn't even got a station yet. I just want to ask if Transport for the North are still backing, because I know a few years ago they were, when I spoke to Jonathan, still backing the reopening of the Fleetwood train station to reconnect Fleetwood to the rest of the world, basically. It's a very difficult place to get to and a very difficult place to get from. And my own son suffered with his education because he couldn't get the transport to Ormskirk to go to university. He was late constantly and consequently has a lesser degree than I believe he could have got had he been able to jump on a train at Fleetwood and go off and do his education. And that's the same for every child in Fleetwood. And there's over 900 children enrolled in school in Fleetwood. Yes, Owen, sorry.
I can respond on behalf of Transport for the North. Yes, that the Fleetwood reopening is in our investment programme and along with a number of other line reopenings or new routes. So yes, it's something we support. I understand it's in the, if I'm right, it's in the rail restoration programme at the moment.
We need proper rail, not just a heritage line, which is all that seems to be being looked at the moment. And I think we need to push further because a heritage line is great for tourists. And we get tourists occasionally anyway who travel up from Blackpool because they can get to Blackpool. But we'll have tourists coming for the heritage, but we've got a lot more to offer than just a prom and a heritage rail if we get that back. And I just need as much support as I can get because we're not a small town, we're a large town who are pushed away because we're part of a more affluent area with wire. So the government tend to not give us money because we've got affluent wire behind us, but they don't give us money either. So, if you understand. So getting the rail back will open up Fleetwood to the world. So sorry, I get a bit ranty.
No, that's okay. And thanks for that, Mary. Much appreciated. And I think that kind of echoes the need for certainty of investment, but sustained investment that I know the Transport for the North team are seeking to bring to the North through their 2050 investment programme, as Owen touched on. Is there
we did get over 3,000 signatories on a petition to bring the rail back.
So, I mean, Sim, just to come back on that earlier question, yeah, absolutely, the North needs to see more investment per head. I think from my perspective, one of the real, and I know there's lots of reports, but it's actually the transparency to start with, what is actually being spent on transport and where, which is really quite difficult to work out from what I've seen in the past. And yeah, the revision of the Green Book should help in terms of the strategic case. That clearly there's as Hugh Merriman said earlier, there's a political agenda. The political winds seem to be behind us, but the rhetoric needs to move into delivery. And I think that's where TfN and our partners need to work together in collaboration with government to make sure that happens.
And just to support what Owen is saying there, I think that we need some clarity because we saw yesterday another announcement from government talking about £400 million in investments. This morning, the Secretary of State was talking about £29 billion of investment since 2010. A lot of these things have already been announced and it may sound to people like it's new money. And I'm hoping that in the IRP that this has kind of set out what has already been announced, what is actually new funding. Because I think all of us in the industry and just consumers, customers would like to just see this kind of for what it is and not any kind of political clouds of dust that are around it.
Excellent. No, and thanks, Robert. And I'm afraid that the time has beaten us, and with the need for us to wrap this up and move across to the closing plenary. For those who are interested, the link to that is in the chat. Molly kindly posted it there, so you can directly just transfer across. So that just leaves me to thank all the speakers for the time and insights today. Really appreciate that. A really interesting conversation, which has given me lots of things to feed back to the closing plenary in, I think I've got 2 minutes to do that, so that will be interesting. Brilliant. So no, thank you all. It's been a pleasure. Thanks very much.